Hello, everyone. My name is Radoika Beretsky, and today I'm going to be talking about the how you can prepare for your next FDA regulatory inspection. And this is presented by SES Global Services and SES Consulting Services. So as I mentioned, my name is Radoika Beretsky. I'm the Director for Food Safety Training. Prior to joining SES Global Services and transitioning to SES Consulting Services, I worked in the food industry for over 18 years, holding several roles in the quality assurance department. I started as a technician, and then over the years, I worked my way through to titles of quality assurance manager and also director for food safety and quality assurance for different companies, both private label and also corporations such as Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. So let's just talk a little bit about SES. We are a company that was founded in 1987, and we are a trusted global leader in third-party environmental sustainability and food quality certification, auditing and testing, and we have a worldwide network of staff training, auditors, and affiliates. So under SES Global Services, we offer certification services such as good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, GFSI level certifications such as Global GAP, Primus GFS, SQF, VRCGS, and FSC 22000. We also have organic handler and grower certification, non-GMO project verification. We do MRL testing and management, Fair Trade USA as well, certification, among others. Under STS Consulting, we offer consulting services such as gap assessments, development and implementation of food safety management systems, verification of third-party internal audit, HACCP plan review, HACCP plan development, label review, among other services. And for training, we offer GFSI level training such as Global GAP, Primus GFS, SQF, VRCGS, and FSC 22000. We also offer FISMA-related training, such as preventive controls for human foods, for animal foods, FSBP, IAVA, which is the intentional adulteration rule, and also produce rule. HACCP, good manufacturing practices, good distribution practices, crisis management, and we are also introducing 5 micro learnings in the near future on Q4 that will improve, among others, basics of food safety as well. So with any further ado, let's just talk about regulatory inspections. So regulatory inspections means an activity that is taken by a regulatory body to determine by investigation, examination, and evaluation of objective evidence, the adequacy of and adherence of the site to the regulatory standards, administrative or operational programs that are applicable to these standards. So they also going to evaluate as well the effectiveness of the implementation of these programs. So the purpose of a regulatory inspection is to ensure that the operations at these establishments are carried out in accordance with approved standards, norms, and guidelines that have been established by the government. In this case, we're talking about the US government. So FDA inspections are typically unannounced. During COVID time, they made an exception and they evaluated high-risk businesses, and based on that evaluation, they provided most of the inspections to these businesses, and also they announced their inspections. But in general, unless situations like COVID rise where they are short-staffed, and they need to act upon, they are unannounced. Today we're going to be focusing mainly on FDA inspections, but there are also other organizations or regulatory agencies that also do inspections. So the USDA inspections are typically on-site in USDA regulated sites. In some occasions, I actually had the experience, I was working for a juice manufacturing facility. They were providing juice they were a juice supplier, and they were supplying juice to a company that wanted to get into the school programs here in California. And per the request, the customer request, we had the USDA at this facility. In California, juice processing facilities are not inspected or overseen by the USDA, unlike Florida, where you have that situation. So in that occasion, we have these inspectors from the USDA coming in and doing an inspection to approve the juice for this company, again, that wanted to supply these schools here in California. We also have some other regulatory audits that are announced, such as the NOP or the National Organic Program. Okay, so again, we focus this presentation only on FDA inspections. Now, why does the FDA conduct inspections? So the FDA conducts inspections for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason is to support its mission, which is to protect the public health by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and security of human and veterinary drugs, biological products, and medical devices, and by ensuring the safety of our nation's food supply, cosmetics, and products that emit radiation. Okay, so the FDA doesn't only inspect the food manufacturing facilities, it also inspects, as you might know, cosmetics and drug facilities as well. So the FDA defines an establishment inspection as a careful, critical, official examination of a facility to determine its compliance with the laws and regulations administered by the FDA. The FDA uses establishment inspections to collect evidence, to document violations, support regulatory actions, or to obtain information on new technologies, good commercial practices, or data for establishing standards or regulations. Now, there are several types of inspections that you can have. You can have a pre-approval inspection that are conducted when an organization makes a submission to the FDA requesting to market a new product, and the purpose of pre-approval inspections is to verify the data included on the application and to confirm the facility is suitable for manufacturing the product. Now, in these cases, typically it's for the pharmaceutical industry where they submit these pre-approval inspections. When you develop new products in the food industry, you will typically don't request FDA approval unless you're seeking a GRAS status, let's say, for an ingredient. And then you're required to submit documentation at that point, and an inspection may be granted depending on the process. There are routine inspections that are mandated by law and use a risk-based approach to determine inspection frequency. Organizations should conduct operations as though an inspection might be initiated on any given day. Those always are prepared and ready for that inspection. So you need to be inspection ready at all times. And then compliance follow-ups. Inspections are used if the organization was issued significant 483 observations or other enforcement actions, including warning letters or injunctions during a previous inspection. So the FDA will inspect and verify the actions taken in response to those observations. The FDA confirming the organization has responded adequately and corrected any previous violations. If the follow-up inspection reveals that the organization has not responded appropriately to the FDA concerns, these will be documented and may be used for additional violation evidence as needed for future regulatory actions. And then there's the last type of inspection is the for-cause inspections, where this occurs when a consumer or employee reports an issue to the FDA. Additionally, for cause inspections can be triggered by reportable events that may have caused significant harm, death, or a product recall. So if you are monitoring your consumer complaints, for example, and there is someone that says, you know, I'm going to report these to the FDA, I'm going to report these to the Department of Health, the local Department of Health, that should trigger a warning for you, because you might have a inspector, depending on the type of complaint, that may go to your facility to investigate at that point. In my tenure in the food industry, I never had an inspector come in specifically for a complaint. However, if I had a person that complained and did these kind of reports either to the FDA or the Department of Health, what they would do is that in the follow-up inspection, annual inspection that I would have unannounced to my facility, they will bring a letter that they would send you prior to, as soon as they receive the information with the complaint, and then they will request for you evidence that you investigated the complaint and that you place corrective actions against that complaint. And typically they will pay attention mostly to food safety related complaints, spoilage or any other complaints might be reported to them, but if there is no suspicious or grand suspicions that that spoilage is related to a food safety issue, they may just dismiss it as a non-food safety issue and not investigate any further. But be aware that these consumer complaints are kept on a database, and when the inspector comes to the facility, have access to the database, and you will be questioned about what kind of action specifically for food safety complaints you took, and to address the concerns of the consumer. There are several types of forms that they're going to have with them. There are three basic ones. One of them is the Form 482, which is a notice of inspection. When the FDA begins an inspection, the inspector will present a 482 along with the contact information in the event of a 483 response is issued. So the 482 explains the agency inspectional authority and provides expectations for the inspector and the firm. The 482 is issued to the organization's top management official or the most responsible person at the site at the time of the inspection. This form typically will require a signature of this top management official or more responsible person. Again, it's just notifying basically that the inspector is at your facility and that they are going to conduct an inspection. At that time, and we'll talk about procedures in a minute, it's good for you to understand what is the scope of the inspection, meaning, you know, establishing the reason why they are there. Are they there because it is a routine inspection? Are they there because there is a consumer complaint that is of concern? So again, when they show you the 482, you can ask those questions as well, just to establish the scope of the inspection and for you to get an idea on how the inspection will go moving from that point. Form 483 is an inspectional observations, and the Form 483 lists observations made by the FDA representative during the inspection. These observations do not represent a final agency determination regarding compliance. However, if they notice that there is a, let's say, good manufacturing practices issue that is noticeable and need to be documented, then they will do that in that Form 83. The 483 formally notifies the organization's top management of objectionable conditions or practices related to violations of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that were observed during the inspection. Okay. Again, they might request, or most likely will request, for you to sign this form. You need to establish in your procedures whether you sign this form or you don't. If you do decide not to sign the form, they will note so in the form, and they will just document that. The third form that they use is the Form 484, which is receipt of samples, which is issued at the end of an inspection describing any samples obtained during the inspection. The 484 is given to the same individual who receives the FDA 482. Okay. Now, every organization that is regulated by the FDA must be ready at all times for a potential inspection. So I think that we established that very clearly in prior slides. So writing a procedure that outlines how to proceed during the regulatory inspection is very important. It is very important as well that this procedure is trained to key stakeholders or personnel. Just remember that the FDA typically will show unannounced during business hours. However, they can show up at any time. So if you cross-train these to key stakeholders at all shifts, it's more to your advantage. Along with the procedures, you should have a form that has sections or a questionnaire that allows you to record information during the inspection. Kind of like a checklist. I recommend that highly, because you might train sometimes people on procedures, but they may forget steps, especially because these inspections only happen on an annual basis or less frequent basis, unless, again, you have an issue, and they'll show up more frequently. If you, let's say you had the annual inspection, but then you went through a recall, they'll show up, you know, within that time frame before the annual inspection. So people tend to forget, right, with that space. So if you have a form, kind of like a checklist that allows you to go, or the individual that is responsible and appointed to be the lead on the inspection, if they can go through that checklist and fill out the information as needed, I highly recommend you develop that as well. Also keep a notebook or to record any questions or documentations that the inspector has requested. When I worked in the industry, I had a specific notebook. It was just a composition notebook that was titled FDA inspections. And that's where I kept record of all the information that I needed for my, or that was given, and any questions and answers that I would provide to the inspection, to the inspector, to those questions during the inspections from the FDA. Now the inspector will arrive, and the announcement will go to the point of contact whose responsibility is to lead the inspection, okay? Typically, this responsibility relies on the on-site quality assurance manager, because that person is considered the subject matter expert for any food safety related activities or responsibilities, okay? However, and I'm just going to emphasize that, however, everyone at the facility should be ready for these inspections. The quality assurance manager might be the leading person during the inspection, but questions might be addressed to other team members as well. I would also say that the most responsible person for the facility, which is typically, and depending on your company organizational structure, it might be your CEO, it might be your president, it might be your plant manager, it might be your operations manager, will have to be present through the entire inspection as well, and be highly involved with the inspection, okay? My recommendation is that the entire management team is involved during the regulatory inspection. Inspectors arrive during, typically again, office hours, 9 to 5. However, personnel working outside office hours must be trained on this procedure in case an inspection shows during off-shift hours. Greet the inspector respectfully and request for them to show their ID to confirm it's an inspector from the agency they say they're representing. They will not handle you, at least this is my experience, the credentials. Like, you cannot take it from there, but they will show it to you, okay? Inspectors will, again, not handle the ID. They'll show it to you, and you have to be really quick because they'll show it to you and then they'll take it away, and you have to have quick eyes actually to get the information needed from that ID. Then when the FDA begins the inspection, a Form 482 notice of inspection will be presented along the contact information in the event a 483 response is issued. The 482 explains the agency inspectional authority and provides expectations again for the firm and the inspection. And as I mentioned, it will be issued to top management, which not necessarily will be the quality assurance manager, okay? Please note that the FDA inspectors are not required to sign your organizational documents, include waivers exempting the organization from any responsibility or liability should an accident occur, form letters concerning access to confidential information your organization does not want to release, training forms acknowledging training or personal gowning procedures and information or data requests. The only document that the FDA inspectors are authorized to sign are the sign in and sign out forms. So your visitor log, basically, in paper or electronic to comply with security measures, including documented the removal, replacement of seals to inspect vehicles and containers. So if you have a GMP acknowledgement form, for example, for visitors that require a signature, the FDA will not sign that. And you can request them to sign and they will deny the signature. So you go through the procedure basically, and you can know that the inspector did not sign upon request. So that's the best you can do at that point in order to show compliance with your policies in the event that you have a third-party audit, such as GFSI audit, okay? So establish the scope of the inspection. I talked a little bit about that earlier. You need to understand, why is the FDA at your facility? Are they at the facility because of the pre-approval inspection request? Are they at the facility because of a routine inspection? Are they at the facility because a compliance follow-up? Are they at the facility to conduct a for-cause inspection due to a consumer or employee report of an issue? Okay, so ask the inspector the scope of the inspection, and they will let you know freely as to why they're there. So let's talk a little bit about the inspection process. So how your organization initially presents itself when the FDA arrives will generally set the tone for the inspection. As I mentioned earlier, ensure that you are respectful and you acknowledge their presence, and treat them, again, respectfully, and be confident throughout the entire inspection, okay? Organization and confidence will project a favorable impression with the inspectors. Upon their arrival, escort them to a designated conference room where your organization's management representative will directly interact with the inspectors. At the beginning of the inspection, ask the inspectors if they would like an overview presentation of your organization. This typically allows them to have a better idea as to what is your business and what products you process or manufacture and your distribution process, okay? So again, this is a great opportunity to show off your organization's competency and provide an overview on how the organization and its quality management system is structured. In addition to the management representative, your organization should have a scribe who will take minutes during the inspection and record all requests for documents and records requested by the inspector. The inspector will review the required documentation to ensure that the required reading programs and procedures have been developed. So during the inspection, they'll do a document review. They'll look at anything that is related to a HACCP or food safety plan. So the first thing an inspector will ask for is this HACCP or food safety plan. And then once you handle this to them, they'll ask for a hazard analysis. So the first thing when they ask you for your food safety or hazard plan, it is recommended that you give them the summary. So if you have a CCP or a process preventive control or any other preventive controls when you're FSMA or regulated, just handle the summary of food safety plan, which are typically tables that you create once the entire hazard analysis and process preventive control CCPs or other preventive controls are determined, okay? Do not volunteer any information. So you will actually provide documentation as it is being requested. So once you provide this summary, which is actually the heart of your HACCP or food safety plan, the inspector will ask you for your hazard analysis. Then you provide the hazard analysis, and then they'll continue asking for all the elements involved or related to this food safety plan and HACCP, or HACCP plan, depending on whether you're a HACCP regulator or you are FSMA regulated. Okay. Again, when the FDA inspector requests document or records, record the request in a log and forward it to your designated employee to complete the request. In other words, you're not going to have all the documentation in the conference room or the office that you have set up for the inspection. They will be requested, and then you bring them as they're being requested. They will also request, in occasions, documentation associated with the activities of the CCP or the preventive controls that you have identified on your plans. So they will give you a time frame and how much of that documentation they need. Remember that within the regulations, whether you're a HACCP regulated facility or you are a FSMA regulated facility, you are required to keep at least 2 years of records on site for inspectors review. Okay, so they will go within those 2 years. In my experience, they only go back 6 months from the time they arrive. But because the law requires for you to have 2 years of records on site, then they might request beyond the 6 months, especially if they see that there is a discrepancy on the documentation or during the observations when they inspect the facility. The FDA typically will not request copies of the documentation requested. However, if they do, best practice is to make 3 copies of each request, one for the official company record, one for the management representative, and the third for the FDA inspector. Each document and/or record should be stamped and watermarked confidential, okay? Once the designated employee has prepared the request, he or she will take documents or records at hand and hand them directly to the management representative, who then will handle it to the inspector. The employee should never be given anything directly, okay, to the inspector. This provides the management representative a brief opportunity to review the documents and possibly comment before handling them to the FDA inspector, potentially avoiding an embarrassing situation. So if there is an issue with the documents or records being requested, the designated employee should inform the management representative of the issue. So the management representative should never be surprised. So the scribe should make note of any records through the inspection that are being brought into the room where the FDA inspection is taking place, okay? So besides reviewing the food safety plan or HACCP plan and associated documentation, the inspector will walk the facility to verify the implementation of the programs and procedures that were reviewed. He or she would look at each area in the facility and assess compliance against pertinent food regulations. When the inspector or inspectors, there might be more than one, request a tour of the facility, the management representative and the scribe should always be with the inspectors. The scribe should record what is being reviewed and the individuals being interviewed. If the inspector requests to take photographs, ensure management representative or a scribe takes similar photographs. Now, you might have a policy in your facility. I think nowadays for securities might be very common, into which you have you prohibit to take pictures. Honestly speaking, if they have to take a picture, they will take it regardless of your policy. I have seen this in my tenure in the industry, where they felt like they needed to take that picture as an evidence, and I will tell them about our policy, and they will say sorry but not sorry and take the picture. So be sure that you are prepared to actually take similar photographs, whether it's with your phone or with a camera with you. If the FDA inspector requests to enter clean rooms or other controlled environments, provide the training necessary to prevent microbiological contamination, including proper gowning requirements and techniques. Sampling. So in some occasions, not always, the FDA can take samples to be analyzed by their internal laboratories. Well, in my 18 years working in the food industry prior to coming here and to SDS, there were only twice where the FDA actually took samples at my facilities. Now, on one occasion was because they wanted to ensure compliance. They'll do chemical testing, they'll do different microbiological testing as well in their laboratories, internal laboratories. And the second time was because I was going through an active recall and they needed to test samples for a particular analyte. So again, they typically don't do it as a routine inspection, at least that's my experience, but when they do it, you have to be prepared. So ensure that you have a sampling protocol in place to ensure that you retrieve samples from the same lot number and pallet that the inspector is taking these samples from. The protocol written at my facilities require us to take 2 samples for each sample taken by the FDA. So out of those 2 samples, I will keep them in retention. So if it was a regular inspection, a routine inspection for compliance, and they would take that sample, I will take the 2, and then that sample will remain in retention. And if any result was coming back unfavorable, then I will take one of those samples and send it to a third-party lab for analysis to just verify compliance as well. Okay. Every time I send this for testing, if I needed to, which again in the first experience was only a compliance inspection, I didn't have to send them. The results came favorable, but in the second one, when they were actually looking for an analyte, I sent those to an ISO 17025 certified lab because the certification will assure me that they would have the systems in place to ensure accuracy and repeatability of the results as needed. Okay. So inspection outcomes. So there are only 2 outcomes to an FDA inspection. So no objectionable conditions or practices were observed and everything is fine. You don't get a 483. Everybody's happy. Or when there are objectionable conditions or practices that were observed, in which case you have a 483 issue to you. Okay. So in order to close the inspection, typically the inspector will have a final meeting with the facility top management to provide any feedback regarding observations noted, if any. Please be sure that you take note during this meeting as well, because they'll give you the 483, but it's important that you understand the information being received, not only the information being written. And at this point, if you have additional questions, it's a good time for you to ask those to the inspector, because once they leave the facility, it will be very difficult to get any clarification for them. If a 483 form is issued, the company needs to again determine whether it will be signed or not. The inspector will note that the firm did not sign the form and will leave you with a copy. Ensure that you give priority to correct or apply corrective actions to observations noted in the 483. Keep track of the corrections and or corrective actions as they will be reviewed by an inspector in a follow-up visit. They have all of these in a database. As a matter of fact, 483 become public record once the inspection is closed. So inspection follow-up. Typically, inspections do not need a follow-up. If you are issued a 483, it's recommended but not required that you send a letter outlining the corrections and corrective actions to implement to bring the objectionable conditions or practices observed into compliance. Again, this is not required, but it's a good act of faith on your favor when you do this. You need to send this to your local agency office or to the regional, if you don't have any local one, to your regional agency office. Now, in conclusion, the key of being ready for an FDA inspection is very simple. First of all, always instill a culture of compliance and food safety among your employees. If you are a GFSI certified company, this has been a part of your requirement at least for the last year and a half. So continue working on that culture of compliance and food safety among your employees. Develop and implement a procedure for regulatory inspections. Train key stakeholders on the procedure and appoint a management representative to lead the inspection and practice mock inspections to ensure that the stakeholders understand their role in their process. Okay, maybe once a year you get together and said, okay, we're going to conduct a mock inspection and see if everybody follows the procedure as it's written. Okay, this will keep people fresh in their mind and how to conduct themselves during an inspection. Okay, so we are going to now address any questions that may have rise. So I don't see any questions in the chat or in the questions. Let me see. Is there any questions? Let me come back to the camera. Any questions at all that anybody might have regarding this presentation? You can type it in the chat or in the question box. Okay, so I see, hold on a second. Let me just open the question box. I see a question here. Let me see. I want to open this window a little bit more. Let me stop sharing my screen. And let's see. Why is this not? Okay, some experts are recommending next taking similar samples by okay, I cannot see the questions very well. Shama, maybe you can help me. Okay, here. Some experts are recommending not taking similar samples because you, one, confirm the results, if not good, or two, may have different results that might not be good, and the FDA will want to use yours. Thoughts? Okay, I have always taken samples. Again, in my experience, I the first one was a regulatory inspection, a regular one, and the results came favorable in their case. And the second one, I was on an active recall. It was an allergen-related recall in which we needed to establish the presence of peanut in a particular product that we produced that was not supposed to contain peanut, but was giving reaction to individuals. And I also took samples. Obviously, those samples I sent out to FARP, which is the allergen authority here in the US, for analysis, and I got the same results as the FDA, which was not content or non-detectable peanut in those samples. Now, there might be a case to where they take samples, they analyze them, and results come unfavorable, and then you send your retentions and your results are favorable. They will not take your results. They will not take the results. If they have favorable results, you don't need to worry about your samples. Don't send them for testing. Okay, just wait. If it's a regular inspection, an annual inspection, take your samples, and if the results come favorable, you don't do anything with those samples. If the results are unfavorable, you may have the choice to send those samples for testing through a third-party lab, and perhaps there's a discrepancy between your results and their results, in which case it will need to be addressed with the FDA. They typically, if they want to have action, depending on what kind of results they have, if they want to take action, they will take action regardless of your results. Okay, again, I mean, you don't want to find a problem if there is no problem. If their samples come back favorable on the results, just, okay, fine, no issues, and then you move on. But if they find an issue and you want to confirm the issue or react to the issue by confirming it with your samples, you may do so at that time. But if they do find an issue and they request you to address it, then you need to address it, because their results will take priority, or they will take the lead against the results that you may obtain on your samples. So that's how I will handle that. Okay. Let's see if there's any other questions. Let's see. Okay, that was answered. How does this apply to working out of a commissary kitchen? Okay, so commissaries are typically handled by the Department of Defense, and they'll do their own inspections, and they're similar to the FDA. I also supply to commissaries in one of my facilities, and besides the FDA showing up every year, because I was FDA regulated, then I will have an annual inspection by the Department of Defense. And you have to be prepared in the same way. For them, it's more an audit than an inspection itself. Okay, so I hope that answered your question. Let's see. Okay, let's see. So we had an inspector refuse to sign or sign in the signing sheet because of confidentiality. And that's perfectly normal. And all you have to do is just to make a note saying that a signature for the inspector was requested and there was denial of signature. And that will be your documentation that the action took place, that you actually requested the signature as required by your procedure. And they typically will not sign anything. So I'm not surprised that they didn't sign. And I think that was the last question. Oh, wait, no, I have another question. Oh, I have a lot of questions. Okay, so this one, I think. What information needs to be added on the checklist for the inspection? So basically, it's a checklist for your procedure. So request an ID for the inspector. Establish the scope of the inspection. Any observations that you have during the inspection that was brought up to your attention. So whether it's documentation discrepancies or done during the inspection itself. You want to take note of what documents were requested on that checklist. Again, any outcome from the review of the documentation and the inspection, any final conclusions regarding the inspection, and any additional follow-ups that you may need to have. Also document if you got a 483 and how you're going to respond to that 483 in the near time. When you establish your procedures, establish how long would you respond to that 483. My recommendation is to submit a response within 14 days or 2 weeks of the inspection to give sense of urgency. And also, once you put that in writing, what the corrective actions will be or the corrections, depending on whether you are able to find a root cause or not, that you act upon it, because once you get a response formally to them, they will come not only with the 483 to check that there were corrections or corrective actions put in place or implemented, but also any implementation as per any response that you provided. What is the duration of an FDA inspection? It depends on the size of your facility and how much walkthrough they have to do. They tend to be very thorough. I have had inspectors just stay there for a couple of hours. Some inspectors that will go and stay at my facilities in the bigger facilities that I have had for a whole day. They try to be as quick as possible because they typically don't do one inspection at one facility a day. They have several facilities in the area or district that they cover. So they tend not to be more than 4 hours at facilities. But again, it all depends on how the inspection goes, how big your facility is. They have that information prior to going to your facility. So if they see that the facility is good in size, they may just spend the whole day there or all full 4 hours. So again, it varies depending on the inspector and the size of the facility and what they see throughout the inspection. What kind of microbial tests for samples the FDA took? So they'll test for pathogens of concern. So in my case, my pathogens of concern was Salmonella and E. coli. If they want to do microbiological testing, and then depending on the sample, it was a juice processing facility. If they took a sample for juice, they would take test for mycotoxins. For apple juice, which apple juice has a regulatory requirement when it comes to patchouli. So they will test for patchouli. If they took samples for, I cannot remember what samples they took, but if they took samples for, let's say, a almond-based beverage that I was making at that facility, then they would have tested also for aflatoxin because almonds have aflatoxins in it. Carrot juice, they would have tested for Salmonella, E. coli, and Clostridium botulinum. So again, they'll test for the microbial of concern. So if you identify a biological hazard in your food safety or hazard plan, they'll aim for those in the testing, just to be sure that your process preventive control is taking care of that, or your preventive controls is taking care of that as stated on your plan. Okay. Again, this was not very common. I was 18 years in the industry, and I would say 16 of those I was in management, and this was, I only got sampled twice, once in a routine inspection and another one on a active recall. Okay, so thank you for sharing that. Peace of mind, sampling is peace of mind. And I think that's all the questions. So thank you so much for attending. And if you have additional requests or any information regarding training, certification, or consulting, please be sure that you contact Bernadette Goldstein. Her information is in the slide that I will share in a minute because I forgot I'm not sharing anymore. But there it is, the slide. So again, we are SCS Global Services and SCS Consulting Services, and we provide training, certification, and consulting services. And any additional information that you might need, please contact Bernadette Goldstein, and she'll answer questions regarding these services. Thank you so much for attending, and I will see you in the next webinar.